Today we have Darren Friend Sensei. Before I bring him on or start talking to him, this year marks the 40th anniversary of Yoshinkan Aikido in Australia. And as part of the celebration in our annual demonstration, we were going to get Darren Sensei, John Sensei, David Sensei, and Mori Sensei to partake in the demonstration, do a seminar. Unfortunately, because of the COVID-19 issue, we've had to shelve that. So I wanted to start this series of interviews with these 4 teachers, Darren Sensei being the 3rd. Mori Sensei, we'll have to wait for him till we can get a translator and do it in person. So, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Darren Friend Sensei.
All right.
So most of you don't know, but Darren Sensei and I met in the early 80s, where we used to work together in a hotel. Now, the less said about that, the better. Darren Sensei has been doing Aikido for 35 years this year. Would you care to say something about your past history in Aikido?
It's been good. There's look, people, if you're interested, it's on my website. You can look it up. But to summarize it, I was with Joe Sensei for about 7 years, and that put me on the road to Japan. I went to Japan for thinking I'd go for a year, and that became 13 years. And then I came back to Australia, and together with my wife, Peggy, we established Aikido Yoshinkai New South Wales here in Sydney. And that was 15 years ago this year. Yeah.
Okay, so
that's it.
15 years of running your own. So
Yes.
There's more to it than that. For those of you who don't know, Darren Sensei last month cycled from Sydney to Melbourne, and geographically challenged. That's about well over 800 Ks on the freeway. He took the long way because of the fires and stuff. So there's a lot more to him than meets the eye. So you've been running a dojo for 15 years. Prior to that, you were in Japan for 13 years. You did the course, and then you were an instructor. How long were you the head foreign instructor at the Thambu dojo for?
Probably 9 or 10 years. Yeah.
9 or 10 years. And you got your 6th dan when?
I got it, let me think, it's probably around 2010, maybe.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's how long it was, folks. I think it was more like 2009, probably 2010, because, yeah. So here's my question. Why aren't you a 7th dan yet?
Yeah, well,
Hold on. Answer that. Hold on, Darren Sensei, before you answer that, let me preface my question. I know offhand of 4 people, at least 4 people that you taught on the course. They are now 7th dans. Not taking anything away from them, but my question is, why aren't you? You're a Shihan, but why aren't you a 7th?
Well, yeah, it's just lucky that I'm a Shihan, actually. So, look, there are two parts to the way I would approach the answer to that. One part being my personal circumstance, and the other part being the system as it stands. All right, so where would you like to start, with the system as it stands or my personal situation?
Personal situation first.
Okay, my personal situation is that I received a letter last year from Noriki Sensei, basically recommending me as for Nanadan, and suggesting that I go through the process, and which is to send in your details and be appraised by the committee in Japan. And I did that, and they came back and said, yes, we recommend you for 7th dan. All right, so in that sense, I've been approved. My personal circumstance, though, is that I'm going, as you know, Sensei, through a transition. I've just closed a full-time dojo and transitioning to a part-time dojo, and I have to spend $20,000 on equipment. So my choices are, do I spend the money on a certificate And I'm very reluctant to do that because I don't see it as having any possible influence on my marketing, on my gathering of students, on the way that I approach Aikido, or I spend the money on new mats, things that can physically bring better results for my students. And that's the way I've chosen to go. So in my personal circumstance, my Nanadana is basically pending.
Okay. And structurally?
Yeah.
You talked about
structurally, well, yeah, I mean, you sort of hinted that, you know, I possibly should have had it a long time ago, and I'm not going to refute that. But I was brought up in a way that you don't, or in martial arts, where you don't put your hand up and say, oh, hello, you know, it's my turn, I need this certificate, you know, blah, blah, blah. You wait and you're recognized, and it's given to you that way.
Okay.
And this way the system now works is that you basically self-nominate, I think would be the best way to describe it. And I could not bring myself to self-nominate.
Okay, so let me just declare my biases here, right? I was in the Yoshinkan. I left in 2010. And I still feel a strong affinity to the Yoshinkan. And wherever I go, people ask me these questions. Hence, I'm asking them now. And they're very valid questions. And I'm using you as an example, right? There are many people overseas who are in a similar situation, and they've got no one to speak up for them. So, you know, the one thing I see is like structurally or organizationally, it's flawed. I wasn't going to mention names, but you mentioned Noriki Sensei. You taught him. How is he as done before you? Right? Yeah. Sorry, let me keep venting before you have a go. People in Europe are the same. Because you've got a sponsor, or because you're willing to put up your hand and ask for a downgrade, the diehards like you and me will never do that. I asked Inoue Sensei in his last trip here before he died, I said, you know, what's the criteria to giving someone a high level or a title? First thing he said to me was, if they ask for it, don't give it to them. Now, all this self-application, is that going in the face of that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, yeah, like the way I see it is that, and this is not a criticism necessarily of Noriki Sensei, it's just the state of the administration. I see it as just being lazy. If you're an organization and you don't know who your 5th, 6th, 7th dan people are, or you know, even your 4th dan instructors, if you don't know who they are, what sort of organization are they? Is it? Right. So those people who are administering should know who at least the higher level people are, and should know when it's time to promote them, or to recommend them, or to push them to be promoted, right? Rather than waiting for them to say, oh yeah, I'm part of the organization. Hello, here I am down in Australia, been here 15 years. Remember me? I once taught you.
What about this, the flouting of the time periods, not just in the Aikido that we do, but in lots of other things. Yeah. There's a flouting of timelines.
Oh yeah.
The timelines that were set in the old IYF was one thing. They were based on timelines of the Uchideshi, or people like you who are full-time. But people who are training 2 or 3 times a week use that as a guideline. And then now it's dropped. Yep. It's dropped even more.
Yeah, you know, probably.
I said this to Chida Sensei once. I said, in the old days, we used to laugh at Aikikai downgrades. And now they laugh at us.
Yeah, that's a sad situation. Look, when I was in the office in Japan, there was one that came across the desk for a 5th dan in Canada, right? And I'm looking at this guy, And it's literally like, historically, he could have been me, right? But I was forced on at the time, right? And I'm processing this paperwork and I'm thinking, I'm here in the Hombu Dojo 6 days a week and I'm still forced on. This dude, there's no way he's training more than twice a week under who I'm not going to say, right? And it's not comparable. So it basically, the whole thing is become inflated. And when I first started Yoshinkan Aikido, a 5th Dan was a really high rank. You know, somebody you would look to and say, wow, you know. Now it's like, you know, 5th Dan is the new Shodan.
By the way, just a little point there. Darren Sensei was my uke when I did my 5th Dan test in '93. Okay,
yeah,
so
what a test that was.
not wanting to pick on the Yoshinkan, but maybe if I don't bring it out, then I'm doing it a disservice, because I still have a strong respect for the place and I don't want to see it fall. A lot of people might say I've forfeited my right to have a say, but you know, hey, my show, my rules.
Yeah, your show, your rules, but also, I mean, if your friends won't tell you, like, who are you going to listen to? You know, like, yeah, you've got, it's not, you know, I'm still part of the Yoshinkan and I'm like one of its strongest critics.
Yeah. Years ago in Sydney, you and me had a chat with Takino Sensei. And I griped about a certain person, and then he said, what else would you like to see change? And you said that the Yoshinkan Hombu Dojo was like a black hole of communications. You'd send emails, it's phone calls, never get anything returned. That's what people are saying to me when I travel overseas. You care to comment?
Yep. They're still saying that, are they?
They're still saying that, yes.
Yeah. It's improved for me personally, but then I've got a direct contact with Noriki Sensei, so he probably feels obligated to return my emails, perhaps more than other people's. But I did a couple of years ago, I wrote an extensive report based on my experience in Japan and my experience running a dojo outside. I had it translated into Japanese, so it was easily passed across all the stakeholders in Japan. That was translated by one of my students who took it to his father, who was a very high-level businessman, so that the Keigo was correct. And not a word back. It literally went into a black hole, never to be seen or heard of again.
Okay, how many years ago was that?
At least 5, 6, I don't know. A few years back.
I did that many a times in the 90s and in the 2000s. Same.
Yeah.
So sorry, go on.
Yeah, go ahead. You go ahead.
No, I was going to move on, but if you got anything else to add.
Look, you know, it's partly too, like, I mean, there's a cultural difference here too. That unless there's 100% agreement in the way to go forward, nothing is going to be said. So if it's something controversial and not everybody agrees, then it will just be sort of pushed aside and, like, you know, hopefully, you know, it'll just go away is sort of my interpretation of the mindset a little bit. But I saw that done many, many times, and it's not something that we like to see, but it's a reality of the way society is and the way that people react in society in Japan.
Well, I like your explanation, except it drives me to drink.
Yeah, true.
Okay, just to move on now, yeah? Look, I have an observation to make. I think that organizations and also the sport element of martial arts are put in there to popularize martial arts and to help it grow. both organization and the sport element. Yeah? But somehow or other, I feel they've taken over and to large extent been the detriment of the art they meant to help flourish.
Yep.
Do you have any, I mean, you spent a long time in Japan. Do you have any observations, any comments about the necessity of organizations or?
Yeah, look, my personal position has gone sort of 360 degrees on this, where if you'd asked me this question 10 or 15 years ago, I would have been very, very much, yes, we need to build like a strong local organization within Australia, everyone like come, you know, to promote Yoshinkan Aikido. Now I'm very much, it's each individual instructor, and I will promote what I believe is to be the best, and you do your bit and other people do their bit, and it becomes sort of decentralized that way. Because when I've seen centralization of authority occur, and whether it be in government or in martial arts or sports, it just creates fractures and cliques, and, you know, people who are in it for their own ego and their own, you know, they've got their own agenda and not necessarily the benefit of all the individuals who are taking part in it.
Message here from John Marshall Sensei, time for a revolution. Okay, look, you wouldn't believe the number of questions I have been sent for you, and I don't have time to go through all the questions. A lot of them come from your own students, so must say something that they don't want to ask you in person.
Okay.
And everyone, you know, behind that fallible face and laughter, Darren Sensei is a really tough guy. And, you know, in my grading, I hit him with Irimi ski really hard in the Sanindori, as hard as I could, and my hand swelled up, and he didn't slow him down at all. I also been on the receiving. I also been on the receiving end of his shihonages, and it's like having a 2-day hangover afterwards. So he's a tough man, and he knows what he's talking about. Okay, a question from Gretchen, and I've got to paraphrase this. Gretchen talks about, you know, in Australia we have a lot of good teachers, a lot of Japanese Budo culture. I'm sure it's the same in the UK, in Asia, in North America. There's a Japanese Budo culture. Sorry, indigenous Budo culture. And then there's the Japanese Budo culture. And she wants to know, what would be the main differences? So there's a few parts to this question. So what would be one or two differences between the Japanese Budo culture and, let's say, the culture we have in Australia? You're familiar with both.
Yeah, okay. I think the broader aspect of it, like, is the culture, not just of the Budo itself, but of the society in general. Because, I mean, that what society is doing is going to come into it, regardless of where you are and who you are. And if you look at post-war Japan, post-war Japan was extremely pacified, because they went from, you know, being pro-war and turning again like 180 degrees, going the opposite way, to the point where anything that was like militaristic or deemed to be sort of aggressive was bad, was considered, you know, something that they didn't want to see. And I think that has sunk into the Budo that we see a lot of in Japan. To contrast that, we've got in Australia, we're a very, very sporty country. And so that sort of drive and energy that we bring from sport tends to come out in the Budo that we do. So Australians, from my experience anyway, are less likely to look at the esoteric elements of training a martial art and look more at how do I kick a goal, whereas Japanese people are more likely to look at it from the esoteric point of view of, like, how is this going to improve my spirit and harmony and all of that sort of thing. And there are people who will be on either side of those two things, but as a general way of looking at, that's how I see it. And
Gretchen also asked, what elements of the Japanese Budo culture is essential that we bring across and keep.
Yeah. What elements are essential? I couldn't say, I can't fully give that a good answer at this stage. I'd have to go away and think about it. But what I would say is that the education system in Japan is not something that I see as being particularly good. So, you know, and that education system tends to put the instructor on a pedestal, and the instructor gives out the information to the students, and the students absorb that and don't ask any questions. And then, you know, they're expected to go away and come back and do an exam. We have a much more, you know, back and forth with our teachers in terms of higher education. And I'm not asking people to question me constantly on the mat, but I do like to interact with my students so that I can both perceive and understand where they are in terms of their understanding of what we're doing, and also get them to, you know, ask if they're unsure. That element is not really strong in Japanese, in training in Japan. It's not really there. You just sort of take what you get. Yeah, I'm sort of ducking the question a little bit because I can't quite come up with a good answer, you know, off the top of my head for the other part.
Gretchen. I think that the most important element would be the reiho. And for me, I don't just mean that in a way of bowing, but in a way of being. How you conduct yourself in the dojo, how you conduct yourself with your teachers, with your senpai, with your kohai, with your dohai. Sorry for, again, she who must be obeyed wants translations. With your teachers, with your seniors, with your juniors, with people equal rank. And understanding that, and it's a way of being. We used to say that in the Western countries, people would put the money down and say, okay, teach me Aikido. Whereas in Japan, they put their money down, it was, may I enter the dojo? So it was a different attitude. And I think for me, if I can bring anything across, it would be that. Of course, there's a lot of things that I don't believe in. And like Darren Sensei says, you know, we use the word os. In Japan, now that is synonymous with bullying. But it's not in my dojo. And it's not in your dojo either, Darren Sensei. So we bring down what we can, and we keep and maybe even bastardize it to suit our ends. That's my two box.
Can I add to that? That in all martial arts, or in all martial arts, but particularly in Aikido, you have your shite and your uke. You call them whatever you want to in whichever language art you're doing, but you have two practitioners. And you need to understand both sides of that equation in order to learn the art. And from that perspective, when you do join a dojo, you need to come into it and think about, how am I going to bring something to this? Like, how am I going to bring myself into this and be of use to this group? If you can do that and make yourself useful in terms of helping out with training, even if it's like if you're injured and you turn up and, you know, hold a video camera for somebody else, that is being, you know, that you're going to get something out of it, and they're going to appreciate the effort that you're putting in. But if you're just looking at it from the point of view of like, what do I get from this? Then sadly, you're only going to get half of that equation.
Now, there's a third part to Gretchen's question. I can't remember it though. Gretchen, we're going to skip that one. This is my thing, right? The big mistake we make is that we come to the dojo to learn Aikido. We come to practice Aikido. We come to teach Aikido. I think we have to change all that. We have to change that. We come to the dojo to do Aikido. So it doesn't matter whether Darren Sensei is teaching, or Gretchen Sensei is teaching, I'm teaching. It's Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You go to the dojo, you go to the dojo. It doesn't matter who's teaching. I think if we can change that in our minds, from learning Aikido to doing, that would help us a lot. And this might be illustrated in one of the questions down the track a little bit. Yeah. So Andy, again, your student, asked, and really important question. He says that he's been to lots of seminars, and a lot of top teachers teach things differently. They emphasize different points. They say different things in different ways. How do you make sense of it as a Q grade or a showdown or something? How do you make sense of that? How do you deal with that? Can be confusing.
Okay.
As you know.
So, right. Well, as a Q grade, you just you say us and you do whatever it is that the teacher's trying to teach you at that time. Right, and you go away, and it might be the next day you get corrected and you get led a different way, and you just have to go with what the teacher's doing. When I was training in Japan, we would have Nakano Sensei teach one class, and the following class Chida Sensei would teach. Right, and they're not massive differences in the way that they're teaching the techniques, but the two men are quite different people, and they have slight nuances that are there to be seen. No one ever goes back and says, oh, Chida Sensei, Nakano Sensei taught it like this, or vice versa. You just say us and get corrected, and you remember that, okay, that's one way of approaching it, that's another way of approaching it. All right, for Andy, all right, he's a Nidan who should be a Sandan. All right, so I'm waiting for him to commit to his next grading when we get past all of this COVID-19 stuff.
Andy, mic drop. Okay. Now, sorry, there's a few questions coming up on the feed here. I will try and answer that online. We just have so many questions, and I don't even get through all of them. So my apologies, everyone. Keep them coming through, and we will try and get to them. Maybe Darren Sensei or I will answer them, because we got nothing else to do we?
That's true.
Okay. Now, and this question from, again, your student, Junichi. He says that, how do you deal when you go into a slump? So you're training regularly and you don't see any improvement. You don't see where you're going or how far you come. How do you deal with that?
Yeah. There's slump and there's plateau. All right. So I don't think I've had a slump, but I have had plateaus where you've reached a level and you just feel, well, I'm here. I'm sort of at this level, and things aren't going up as rapidly as they were in the past, and you miss that excitement of you can feel the changes that are occurring in your technique. And what tended to happen for me is that there are fundamental techniques that we all have, and I will have a breakthrough in a fundamental technique somewhere, and that will then carry on across all the other techniques. Right? The periods between the plateau and the next level, they tend to get longer, for me at least. The longer I've been at the art, it's taken longer to go on. But I always feel that there is a very, very slight upward gradient on what I'm doing, but the big jumps don't occur as often. To break out of it, I think you need to shake things up a little bit and try things that are different. Try things in when you work with students with fellow students in Jiawaza, try things that you haven't done before, right? And just let things fail. Like, I spend a lot of time letting things fail to see, okay, that's the limit, the lower limit of what I can do, right? So now I've got to back it up a little bit more to make sure that it's, the integrity of the technique is still there. Break things apart that way.
Okay, Junichi, I'm going to share a story with you. A few years ago, I was in Japan, and just for a change, we were getting really pissed. And I was sitting next to Chida Sensei, and I said to him, my Aikido stagnated. I'm just stuck. And he said to me, if you think you're stuck, you're improving. And if you think you're improving, you're stuck. And I looked at him like, well, that's a typical Chida Sensei answer. Cryptic, makes no sense. And then he pointed out to Jones Wales and he says, Jones, how's your Aikido since you've come to Japan? And Jones says, it's been going up. And Chida Sensei said to me, he's stuck. It took a long time for me. I thought about it for a long time. And what I understand was, if you're stuck, it's because you're trying the next level and you're not achieving it. But if you think you're getting better, it's because you're not challenging yourself. You're staying within your bounds and you think you're good because you're doing the same old thing over and over. But when you're not getting better, it's because you're trying different things. Like Darren Sensei said, probably there is no slump, there's plateaus. So you're not going backwards.
Yeah.
You're just not going up because you haven't got that level yet. You got to just keep pushing.
Yeah.
And Junichi, my friend, what would constitute a plateau for you? 6 months, 3 months? I've been in plateaus for decades. Kid you not. And that's why they invented this. Okay, Darren Sensei.
Question. I'll throw something back. Do you know the levels of competency? Like you have your unconsciously incompetent, consciously incompetent, the levels of learning through an art. You know that, right?
No.
Yeah. So you get up to the point where the highest level of that is called unconscious competence, where you're so good at doing something that you're not actually thinking about it while you're doing it, right? That's basically what is, a master. Like you look at, Michael Jordan or some other athlete, he's not thinking about it when he's doing a slam dunk, right? But the next level after that is complacency, and that's when, things will start to drop. If you just sort of accept what you're doing, right, you'll become complacent and then you'll have a bit of a slide and you won't be aware of that slide until it's too late.
Interesting.
I thought so.
Yeah, no, that is food for thought. Now, question. Not that I haven't been asking questions all along, but Aikido has become, a lot of Aikido schools have become where people stand there and they worry about whether their little finger should be here or here.
Sorry, I'm sorry to react like that.
And you can go for whole classes, whole weeks of training, whole months of training without perspiring. The fitness element is absent. Is fitness, is that hard training that you and I had to do when we were younger, is that relevant? Is that important?
Yeah, I think it is. And the reason I say that is that, yes, you can be, like you have skill sets, like I have skill sets, you have skill sets, and those skill sets will stay. If I put on a lot of weight, I'll still have those skill sets. But what I will not know is what my real potential would be. All right. So in order to know what your real potential is, you have to be fit. All right. It's as simple as that. And, part of the training when you're young, I started this not to get fit, but because it was a physical activity that I enjoyed. It was replacing rugby for me when I first met you. And to your credit, you put up with the rugby player for a long time who had no sense of, backing off or the things that we do in Aikido, but eventually it got hammered into me. If you're not fit and at least, trying to achieve a relatively a reasonable level of fitness, then you're not going to reach full, competency. I've seen people who've come in to my dojo and they've come from other places and they can't do a kemi. Like they can't do, a koho, a kemi. And I'm not, even if you have to use your hands to stand up, I'm quite okay with that. But I mean, I've seen people who could not stand up at all. What do you do?
Okay. I wasn't going to ask you this, but I'm going to because John Marshall Sensei kind of skirted around the question a couple of times. The Yoshinkan old versus the Yoshinkan now. the Hombu Dojo?
As you know, I haven't been to Hombu Dojo for a number of years, so it's a bit unfair of me to say so. But what to criticize it, what's happening now, because I don't really know what's happening now. But what I would say is that in the period that I was there, I noticed a change, and things became easier. Right, things were backed off. There are many reasons for that. Some of them are good, possibly, and some of them not so good. And I could go into a couple of them. And I will. One of them was money, right? So instead of, expelling people from a course because they can't keep up or do what is expected, or even basically, stick to the agenda, we would have to roll out the red carpet and assist them, to get over the line. All right. Now, as you know, in my course, I think there were 14 who started and there were only 4 who finished. All right. But after that, it became like very, very rare. If you started the course, you were almost guaranteed that you would finish it.
Sorry, I saw that happen in the 80s as well. I've experienced that. In the 80s. Yeah. So, okay. Look, John Marshall Sensei says he didn't skirt around it. He just did nimble Tai Sabaki. We're winding up. So, second last question. Is there something you'd like to offer people to practice, or something to remember, or any words during this strange times we live in?
Okay. So I can give you a physical exercise if you want. It's not particularly difficult or complicated, and everybody should be doing it already anyway if they're practicing Yoshinkan Aikido. All right, and that physical exercise is simply to move into Kamae and pick. I've got I'll just move the camera. So this wall here is double brick. I got to unplug myself for a moment.
Yep.
So if you don't do it on gyp rock, or what North Americans call something else I can't remember, but try to get yourself so you've got your spacing, right, and move into Kamae, and you want your arm to absorb your weight, right? So the weight is coming in and behind it, right? And if you do it against a softer wall, you should see a bend in the wall. This is quite solid. I can feel the house absorbing that as I do it. If my arm is in the wrong position, it'll bend. Right? And that's your entrance for irimi-ski. That's your Kamae. If you're coming up and you're going like this, and then you feel yourself being pushed back, then you're in the wrong position, and you don't know what you won't be able to apply the techniques that you're doing. That's a simple exercise that you can do anywhere.
Just to clarify, you are not saying a straight arm, right?
No, what you've got to do is you've got to have your arm by your side, and you want your arm to reach the target as your feet reach the position that you would normally finish your leg movement. So if you go arm and then leg, you'll feel yourself being pushed back. Right? If you do it correctly, you'll feel the energy going to the front.
Awesome, thank you.
Try. You don't have to, no, but that's more to other people. And to everybody who's out there who's stuck in this COVID-19 world that we're in at the moment, I'd say make the most of it. All right, look at it as being an opportunity. All right, of course, we're all pretty down because we can't get together and train, but there's plenty of stuff that we've all got extra time. So make the use of the time. Don't just binge watch Netflix like I have been doing. All right, get out there and try something different. All right, learn how to do a headstand. Pick something. Learn how to knit. Whatever takes your fancy. There's plenty of stuff that you can use or do in the time.
Okay, that was the second last question, but I think you answered the last question. The last
Okay.
question, is there anything you want to say? I'm taking it, making my thing here after watching Eddie Maguire to say that I'll give my guest the last word and then I'll sign off. So
Right.
anything you want to say about what we talked about, what we didn't talk about, any organizational stuff, personal stuff?
Well, look, I'd like to thank you for organising and putting these talks on, and also to thank you for the leadership you've shown within Australia and around the world in the Yoshinkan community over the years. I mean, this gentleman will not stand up and do that for himself, but his voice has been there when there have been no other voices, and many people owe him a debt of gratitude for leading the way and making things clear in terms of how people feel about the art and so forth. So thank you.
Of course,
and thank you for your friendship over the years too.
Thank you. Not what I wanted to hear, but thank you very much. Now everyone got to stay, keep the flame alive. Next week, thank you, Darren Sensei. Thank you very much. We'll probably revisit all this in the near future. Everyone, next week we have the infallible, I don't have enough expertise for Paul Kale Sensei. He's going to be my guest, and it's going to be massive. When Paul Kale Sensei speaks, we listen. And that's a quote from Darren Sensei. This man, I cannot speak highly enough of this man. He comes across as a knuckle dragger, but honestly, I learned a lot by listening to Drager Sensei when I was young. And since then, Paul Kale Sensei has been the closest I've come to someone seeing marrying Budo and military. In the old days it was the same, but now bringing it together and not just melding it, but melding it and taking forward. So please stay with us next week. And if you liked what you saw today, please share it. That would be immense help to us. It's a shot in the arm for us too. So please share it. John Marshall Sensei got 4,500 views, so we need to make sure Darren Sensei gets more than that. It's not a competition. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Darren Sensei. Till next week.
We'll